Hey lady, welcome to the Postpartum on Purpose podcast. If we haven't met, my name is Anne Marie. I'm wife to James and mom to 5 beautiful kids, ages 9 down to 2 months, with 1 miscarried baby. It is my hope to help other women experience postpartum as a time of grit, growth, and grace. This is episode 58. Hi lady, I hope you're so well. Last week I was off because Cecilia had her baptism that Sunday. I just wanted a little bit of a break afterwards, but it was beautiful and a really blessed day. And yeah, I'm just very grateful for that. This week's free things will be brief. One is that I am celebrating $150 in Similac coupons sent to a mom that lives about an hour and a half away from me and can use them. I don't need formula coupons, but for some reason, Similac has sent me mega coupons. I'm talking $15, $20, and even $30. So I've just sent them on to this lady who's able to use them, and I've really celebrated that. I'm really grateful to be able to get them and pass them along to her. The other free thing this week was that my mom found 2 really pretty church blouses for me at a thrift store near her. They're both floral, and frankly, I don't know if I would have tried them on, but I really like how they look. So that's this week's free things. I wanted to talk about weeks. I was going to say briefly, but then I was like, scrub that, because every time I say it's going to be brief, it's false. But I wanted to talk about weeks 5 and 6. I'm now 10 weeks postpartum today. And I wanted to reflect on weeks 5 and 6 as a mom of 5, both from the perspective of specifically postpartum related recovery kind of things, but then also zooming out a little bit, talking about our family schedule and how the bigger family dynamics have worked in, or did work in, weeks 5 and 6 as well. Postpartum specific related things, recovery related things. My bleeding, after it normalized at about almost 4 weeks postpartum, it tapered off and was completely done by 6 weeks, though if I'm stretching a little bit beyond the 5 to 6 week range, as I'm speaking to you here, it started again a couple of days after week 6. So let's say it was like 6 weeks and 5 days or something. Then I had 4 more days of bleeding, and it was heavy enough. It was dark red, always, never bright red, but it was heavy enough to need a liner every single day. I don't think it was my period, because my fertility has never returned that early. But this has happened with one other kid, and I can't remember which one, where it stopped totally. And then just a couple of days later, it picked back up briefly, like a encore presentation, and then went away. And I haven't had anything since then. That was the bleeding front. I went at 6 weeks to my pelvic floor physical therapy checkup, and it was great to be there, but it was also frustrating because some of the same pains that I was having towards the end of pregnancy have recurred. And so we've had to work on those, and they've largely had to do with weakness on one side of the body leading to tightness on the other side, in the muscles specifically, trying to overcompensate. And a lot of that is due, I believe, one, to positioning. Some of it was my own fault from how I was sitting, working on my bed, doing work on my bed, sitting for months and months. I was just sitting in awkward positions. So some of it was from that. But then the weakness specifically was from, I think, dialing back the strength training, starting much earlier than I usually would. I think I did my last strength training exercises at maybe week 31 or 32, specifically because of the vulvar varicosities that I had. Isn't this so much fun to talk about? Isn't pregnancy so fun? And I sound so old. But I dialed back the strength training exercises so as not to exacerbate the vulvar varicosities, but one of the consequences of that, unfortunately, was some weakness. Ever since that week 6 appointment, every week we've been working on that. We did dry needling one week, we did some exercises. I had to back off of some of them, which was annoying because they were trying to strengthen one thing and it was straining another. We're on the straight and narrow now. I think the last week and a half, I've actually felt much better and actually been able to notice, because you know how it is when you go into an appointment and they say, "Are you feeling better?" And you're thinking, if I am, I don't know it. If the progress is happening at all, it's so slight as to be unnoticeable. But in the last week and a half, I am actually noticing a real difference, which is great motivation to keep doing my exercises. That's the pelvic floor physical therapy front. Highly recommend that, even if you are not in a position like I was this particular postpartum of having had vulvar varicosities and then these weaknesses and so on and so forth. Typically, from what I understand, every woman is going to have some weakness or instability due to relaxin, especially if she is breastfeeding, in her hip region, maybe lower back as well, maybe upper legs. And then, of course, no matter who you are, you're going to have some weakness in the core as things are needing to come back together. So I highly recommend seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist. Maybe you won't need it for several months on end, which is what I'm anticipating for myself. Maybe that won't be necessary for you, but I highly recommend getting trained or working with somebody who is trained to recognize and help strengthen those areas. And one of the recommendations my pelvic floor physical therapist made was, hey, right now, until things get stronger and the pain subsides, and I'm saying this at 6 weeks, we haven't progressed it yet, but this is what she told me early on when I asked her, do I start exercising again? She said, for now, I'm super comfortable with you walking, but let's hold off on anything more intense than that for the time being. And that's totally fine. What else? Bleeding stopped, pelvic floor physical therapy. Oh, I had an OB checkup that was pretty much nothing. A big old nothing burger. It was great to talk to my OB because she wasn't able to be there at the birth. So I essentially told her my birth story. And I got to talk to her actually about, not related to myself, but about stocking miscarriage kits. Several episodes back, maybe episode 55, 54, 55. There was a guest episode hosted by Maria Servold of the EPLA, Early Pregnancy Loss Association. And she talked about stocking miscarriage care kits for women who have experienced miscarriage. Either they have small kits if you have, I believe, I want to say it right. They have small and large kits. One's if you've already miscarried, and one is if they are anticipating. And already miscarried, by which I mean like you're already bleeding. The baby has already come out. And then one, if you're anticipating that happening, maybe you had a sonogram and you were told the terrible news that the baby had no heartbeat. So you were anticipating that happening. Anyhow, I got to talk to her about that, and it looks like her office is going to stock, at least for her particular patients. She's in a pretty large practice, but at least to begin, she is open to having miscarriage care kits stocked. She said out of her patients, and she's a part-time OB at this point, she has about 1 to 2 per month. I'm really looking forward to getting those into her office, getting those into her hands so that she can distribute those to other women, especially those who might want to collect their baby's remains if they are planning to have a funeral of some kind or burial. That was the OB checkup. Was there anything else I wanted to talk about related to my stuff? I don't think so. Between weeks 5 and 6, though, Cecilia had 2 nights in a row where she was up every 2 hours. And ironically enough, the timing of them was the night, 2 nights before, and then the night before a friend of mine got married, and I had been looking forward to this wedding and dancing at this reception for months. 4 months. I was invited to be a bridesmaid originally. And then back in December, I was looking at the calendar and making the calculations, and I thought, you know what? I can't be a bridesmaid when Cecilia is only, well, at that time I didn't know if it was a boy or girl, but when the baby is only 6 or 7 weeks old, I just will not be in a place, even from a breastfeeding perspective alone, and needing to be available to her on demand. It's not going to work. But so once I had said, I'm so sorry I won't be able to be a bridesmaid, but I really want to come to the wedding, and my whole family is invited. And then Cecilia goes and has this absolutely terrible sleeping pattern, and you can't reschedule the wedding, right? You cannot reschedule the wedding. But you can do the best that you can. And I had an absolutely fabulous time at the wedding and the reception, and then just felt so rough afterwards, which is fair, right? I danced for hours, and I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast episode previously, or briefly rather, but I danced for hours and was holding one of the kids pretty much most of that time. So definitely worth it. So glad that I went, but yeah, just really struggled after that one. Really felt gross for a couple of days. Other things, Cecilia has been up and down with her eating. And by her eating, I specifically mean with puking up one, feeding every day. Not every single day, but like several days in a row. And then she'd stretch it out for a couple of days and she'd go back to it. And it's just that she's not been able to manage her air well. So she'll get bubbles in her belly and then she'll puke. For a time, I was able to hear her gulping air, and so I at least had a heads up. I mean, the missiles had launched already. There was no stopping the missiles at that point when the missile is the puke. But at least I had a heads up that, oh, this is what's about to happen. But then fast forwarding again to this past weekend, which right now I'm 10 weeks along, like I said, or 10 weeks postpartum. Fast forward to this last weekend, I didn't hear her gulping air, and all of a sudden she just threw up everywhere. That was really frustrating and really discouraging because I thought, how how am I supposed to help her if I can't even hear that this is what's happening? And I have absolutely no idea if there is any connection with this at all. I have absolutely no idea if there's any connection with this at all, but it just occurred to me this evening. This is the only child who I have had antibiotics right before I gave birth. And that was because I had group B strep. I was group B strep GBS positive. I got the antibiotics. They wipe out the baby's gut microbiome, essentially the good and the bad bacteria, both. I just wonder if that had any impact on her ability to manage air in her belly. I don't see that that would be a direct connection from what I understand, but I just think it's interesting that all 4 of my previous kids had no problems at all managing their air, and yet here we are. Is it a complete coincidence? Maybe. I don't know. I just think it's interesting that this is what's different about her compared to all of her older siblings. The good news on that front is I did have a lactation consultant come in last Thursday. She suggested, which this is not, it's not ideal right now, but it is at least potentially a solution for the time being. She suggested laying almost completely back, so being almost recumbent, laying on a couch whenever possible to breastfeed, and laying back on a pillow. And that way, just with gravity and positioning, it can help the baby get a slower milk supply, also very strong letdown. And even though I will pop her off once I recognize or feel the letdown, and I kind of pop her off, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gushing right now. Even though I do that or can do that, it also helps slow down the flow just with that positioning. And I will say that I was not really doing that after the lactation consultant appointment on Thursday because I thought, oh, well, I'm not hearing her gulp air. And then, like I said, Saturday that happened, Sunday it happened again. I have laid down for every feeding almost as much as possible. A couple of them have been outside the house. But while I'm home, definitely laid down almost very low, not flat, but very low, every feeding since Sunday night. And she has, as of Wednesday, as of tonight, has not had any more puking since then. And I'm noticing that she seems more full and she's pooping more than she was. She was not pooping too little, but she is definitely pooping a lot more than she was before. Seems fuller, seems like she's eating more. And last night also, I fed her about 10 p.m. and I was the one who woke her up at 5:45 this morning, which is her very longest stretch of sleep ever. These are the things that occupy my time and thoughts nowadays. And until I had a child who had trouble with breastfeeding like this, in this way, I just, frankly, I felt badly when other women experienced struggles with breastfeeding, but I did not know what it was like. And now that I do, I have a lot of empathy for other women who experience this as well. And I can see how it takes time and energy, especially when you're wondering things like, is the baby getting enough? Are they gaining enough weight? Because that was the other thing too. She had her 2-month appointment. Now I guess I'm not even really focusing on weeks 5 and 6 anymore. She had her 2-month appointment last Friday, and her weight gain was acceptable, but it was not great. And it was slowed down from her first month when she had had excellent weight gain, but was puking less. All of that rolls around in your head as a mom, right? And from an OCD perspective, a tendency towards OCD, towards obsessive compulsive disorder tendencies, that hits all of the bells, right? It triggers all of the bells, all the alarm bells, because OCD tendencies seek 100% certainty, 100% comfort, and 100% control. And to be uncertain of your baby's weight gain, to be out of control to some extent of her managing her own air, trying to do what you can, but not being able to ultimately control that, not knowing how this is going to go. All of those things are just They're challenging. Are they insurmountable? No, but they are difficult. They are difficult, and that's something that I found. So that was starting to ramp up between weeks 5 and 6 a little bit more than it had been earlier on. What else? What else? What else? I think those are all the things related to the baby and I, and I'll zoom out a little bit to family dynamics. When I talked about in the weeks 3 and 4 summary episode, which might have been 56, seems like it was 56, I mentioned how we seem to go through a 2-week honeymoon period after the baby's born, and then we have we have what I call the adrenaline detox phase after that, and that one lasts way longer. Usually it's several months. Usually every kid has their own way in which they're acting out. And weeks 5 and 6 were not exactly an exception to that, particularly for my 2 older kids who are 9 and 7.5. That has been an ongoing just conversation that my husband and I continue to have. And to some extent, it's involved increased responsibilities for them to help encourage them to curb some of the behaviors and some of the talkback that it has been creeping in. That is starting to improve, but it has been a real thing. And it's been a real thing that we've been dealing with the 2 big kids in particular. At that same time, in that same time frame, we had a lot of vacation Bible schooling for the 2 older kids, which was part of the frustration actually with their behavior, was that they were getting to go to 2 different, total this summer, 3 different vacation Bible schools. So they were hearing songs about Jesus, they were listening to Bible stories, doing crafts, playing games, eating the snacks, meeting other like-minded children, all of that. And yet we were still seeing these very frustrating behaviors. But the vacation Bible school, the 3rd and final one, yielded a new friend for my 9-year-old. And friends have been a little thin on the ground for him to this point. So honestly, even though it involved driving to that particular VBS only a minute and a half away, but the one with the week before had been a 20-minute drive either way, but in pursuit of this goal, right, of hoping to find a like-minded friend for him, for my older son. It was worth it. It was worth it to me. I understand that the first 6 weeks postpartum are meant to be a time of greater rest, and so I did make sure that we scheduled almost nothing during the day for the 2 weeks that we were in the last 2 VBSs, but those were back-to-back weeks. We had a little bit of break in between VBS 1 and VBS 2, but VBS 2 and 3 were back-to-back weeks. I made sure that during the day we had almost no commitments. So if we were going to go to the splash pad, that was great, but it would be kind of a spur of the moment thing, or maybe the night before we'd make plans with friends. All of that simply to say, there's a verse that I read, or a quote that I read from a blog post from 2015 that I clicked on because it was a comment to an article that got reposted somewhere. So it was an old article. Somebody had in the comments linked to their own blog post from 10 years ago. But I went to it and I read it, and I can't honestly tell you even what the focus of the main article was. But the quote that I pulled from it was, "The things we love will make us tired because we are investing ourselves in them. The things we love will make us tired because we are investing ourselves in them." And that gets at the heart, I think, of why I knowingly compromised to an extent the rest of weeks 5 and 6 as part of that first 6 weeks, the first 40 days roughly postpartum, was in pursuit of something that was very important to me, to invest myself in helping my son find a friend, and he did. So yes, was I a little bit extra tired? Yeah. Yep, that's true. But was it worth it to me in light of the hopeful outcome? Yes, actually it was. I think that's mostly it, lady. Oh, during weeks 5 and 6 as well, that's when we started the shift over from people making meals for us, which is so kind, to cleaning out things that had gone into the freezer and then starting to make our own meals. James did a lot of that for me for which I was very grateful. So I was making very few meals. And I'm just now in the last week, I guess, around week 9, starting to take over most of the meal making now. Or going back to what we were doing before, which is usually I make 4 meals a week, James makes 3 roughly, and or maybe we'll have the wiggle room of one eat out meal in there. But we're basically back to our previous programming, or moving forward. We are doing what we used to do. And oh, the very last thing was that between, I think around week 6, I started to bake and freeze things for the baptism party. We made right about 60 pounds of pulled pork because we had around 130 guests. And in order to not make that crazy for myself, and then in turn to make it crazy for my family, I started to do some of the pulled pork crock potting ahead of time and then freezing a roast or 2 at a time, so that when all was said and done, we had 8 roasts worth of pulled pork in our freezer, or I guess the last 3 I just made that weekend of the party. That worked out really well, and I also froze a bunch of muffins, some of which were for the party and some of which were just to make breakfast more easy the week of the party leading up to it. I think that's everything for this week, lady. I'm not sure if next week's going to be a guest post or if I'll do the review of my consult with a postpartum nutritionist through Faye.